Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you've felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 112. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very, very special guest out in San Diego, Jacob Bills. Jacob, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Happy to be here and excited to get this thing going.
I am so excited to get this thing going as well. And the people listening to this can't see us, but I have to give you a compliment. You've got an incredible smile, both in terms of the energy it gives off and your teeth are just so white.
I appreciate it. Same back to you, Joe.
Well, I don't know. My teeth aren't that white. I mean, is there a secret? We're gonna dig into this for a sec.
Nah, just Sonicare and consistent brushing. Lived with a dentist for about 4 years, so I'll give him a shout out, Sam Snipes, if you're listening.
I hope Sam Snipes is not listening because I have not been to the dentist in about 4 years. It's pretty bad. But this is my reminder, so I'll get there. And before we get too far into anything, Jacob, if you could introduce yourself to the people listening who might not know who you are.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Tacoma, Washington, which is just a little bit south of Seattle, Washington. I actually moved to Seattle after 4 years at Gonzaga University. And then after 4 years in Seattle, decided to make a big jump down to San Diego and been here for almost 2 years now. And it's just been one of the best moves that I could have made. So living here in San Diego, living with my girlfriend up in Claremont and running my own personal training business.
Okay, so let's start with this. How did you first get into fitness?
So fitness for me really just started in early athletics, just playing t-ball and kind of just growing up through there. Played a lot of high school sports, football, soccer, basketball, and then I played a little bit of rugby in college. So it's always been a part of my life, but there was definitely a point in college where I really started taking it a little bit more seriously. Wanted to learn more, was going through all the bodybuilding forums and all the different free workouts that were out there. And I think it was in my junior year of college when the nutrition part of it really kicked in. And then that's when I started to see a lot of the mental changes, a lot of the physical and physique changes. And yeah, it's just kind of carried on through there. It's always been a part of my life, but about 2 years ago is really when I made that jump and decided to start my own business with a lot of encouragement from other people around me too.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the business aspect as that and that timeline is something that you and I both share in common. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about maybe some of the life lessons you've learned through fitness. And I ask that because I think fitness goes hand in hand with life in so many different ways. So when you look at fitness, what are some of the lessons you've learned that apply to life?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is I really just believe it's kind of the foundation for everything else. When you've got your body right, when you've got your nutrition going well, it really impacts your mental clarity. And having a fit body and choosing to do physical activity every day, kind of whatever it is, doesn't have to be weightlifting. That's just one thing that I prefer. And choosing to eat well is just a consistent decision that you have to make. And so one, it just helps you develop a routine of consistency, but two, it allows you to perform other tasks at just like the highest level, whether it's business, school, being a good friend, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever. It allows you to be a better person. And so I'd say kind of the overall lesson is that it just bleeds into every area of life. And that's why it's so important for me.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is from Alexis Carrel, who said, "Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor." And
Yeah, I love that.
for me, I fell in love with the world of fitness. And in the beginning, the world of bodybuilding, that didn't last long, but I fell in love with that as a teenager because it was so beautiful to me, the concept of needing to put in this work to sculpt your body. So blood, well, maybe not blood, sweat, tears,
Little
maybe a
blood.
little blood, effort, over and over and over again. And it wasn't something that you achieved. Physique wasn't something you achieved once and then just kept. It was something that you achieved and then maintained. And it required daily, consistent, intentional work. And that's why anytime I see anybody who is in shape, who you can tell from the outside fitness is part of their life, I hate to say this, but I think of them at a higher level than maybe somebody who doesn't, simply because I know the effort, the time, the dedication, the discipline that it takes to get there. And granted, there are different ways to apply yourself outside of physical fitness. So it's not a fair judgment, but I just know that's how it's affected my life. So I love seeing that in others.
I think what you said is really rings true for me too. It's not like you're not thinking of somebody as differently, but you can relate to the amount of work that was put in there. And there's just a common respect there, little head nod you give somebody at the gym when you're walking by, make that quick gym friend. It's all too relatable. So yeah, I agree with you a lot.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too far into this because I have a feeling it'll come up with some of the later questions, but tell me what was the push, or was the season of life leading up to starting your own business like? And what were some of the thoughts that went through your head, both in terms of, hey, this is so exciting and this is so scary?
Yeah, so was in the corporate life and it was great. Really didn't have too many complaints, but there was something deeper in me that just felt like there was something more. And I had always been into fitness and was really just giving a lot of free workouts to people, kind of giving some free advice here and there. And at one point, I had someone close to me just say, "Dude, you can monetize this?" And I was like, "Oh no, like I like helping people." And they're like, "I get it, but like you can help people and monetize it at the same time." And it was something that it didn't really click in my head until I really started to dive into it and just started doing some like free challenges and things like that over Instagram. I was not somebody who posted on Instagram or made all these reels or stories or anything. That just wasn't me at the time. But I ended up hiring a business coach and found that that investment, one, was probably the biggest investment I made in myself outside of schooling. But it produced some of the best results and really helped me just get that foundation to be able to build off. So it was more of a season of me just kind of following my heart. I know, as cheesy as that sounds, but I knew that what I learned from fitness in my life and what it helped me through, and we can go into that a little bit deeper. I wanted to be able to give that to other people. And once I started doing that, something clicked inside of me and I was like, no, this has to be longer than just a little stint here or something on the side, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. And we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, I just want to throw out the phrase that there's nothing wrong with making money. And for whatever reason, for me, for a long time, it felt like a bad thing to use what I was passionate about or what I cared about to make money because it felt like I was taking from other people. Whereas now I see it as a mutual exchange. And I'm not sure why that was the case for me. It sounds like it might have been the case for you, but there's this concept in the Japanese culture called ikigai, which I touched on in a previous episode. And it's the intersection of what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And if you can find the intersection of those four things, you have found ikigai, or your life's calling, essentially. And I think it's a piece that a lot of people miss is they think, I'm good at this, I enjoy this, I feel like other people can benefit from this, but the act of exchanging that value for money can feel a little bit odd at first to some of us. And so I'm sure we'll get into that later. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I can talk about that. And that was definitely the case for me too.
yeah. So for now, we'll dive in with the first big question. When you look at your life to this point, what is the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
Yeah, I know this can be the case for a lot of people, but for me, it was dealing with my parents' divorce, everything that led up to that point. This was my junior year of high school, and then really the fallout that came from that afterwards. So, yeah, I know that's a touch point for a lot of people, and I know that's just a different situation for everybody. But for me, it was this event that I think, should have happened earlier. Probably would have saved a lot of heartache. And then afterwards, just dealing with a separation, as a lot of people can attest to, is just a messy situation. So that in itself was probably one of the hardest things that I had to deal with and still deal with to this day to a varying degree. Love both my parents, worked through a lot of that stuff. Want to be respectful on this podcast of both of them too. And but yeah, man, that was a tough one for sure, and it made me really dig deep and do some deep healing and some self reflection.
How old were you when you started to notice that something was off, if you will? And what did that actually look like or feel like for you at that age?
Yeah, so I would say the first time I really actively noticed it was probably 10 or 11 years old. I mean, most people dealing with a divorce, there's just a lot of fights, a lot of anger, um, never really towards me, but as a kid, you kind of get the residual of that as well, whether they meant to or not. Like I said, love both my parents, but just some of that anger that you're around for that many years in the same household is that's a tough one to deal with. And I think that stuck with me for a while, and I actually developed quite an anger problem on my own, but it was never something that I externally showed. It was something I internalized. And so when people hear me talk about that, and a lot of people who are listening who know me, if they decide to listen to this podcast, will probably be surprised at that as well, because it's not something I talk about or broadcast enough, but it's actually something that I decided to go to therapy for after about 8 years of fighting my mom on it. Bless her heart. I finally decided just to do it, and it was probably one of the better decisions in my life to take on therapy and really dig into some of the things that were helping to develop my anger issues and my anxiety issues, and that's kind of where fitness came into my life as well. So
Mm. So before we get to that intersection where the anger, the anxiousness, therapy, and fitness came together in some way, shape, or form, can you tell us a little bit about the internalized anger and what did that or does that feel like? And I ask that because I'm sure there's somebody listening, maybe many people listening, who have internalized their anger, and on the surface, you would never think that this is an angry person, but on the inside, they are harboring that.
yeah, I would say it was probably the unhealthiest thing I ever did was hold on to that till post college, even is really when I decided to go to therapy to get some help for it. But there were definitely a couple holes in my college rooms, walls. And I think mainly what happens is you sit there by yourself thinking that nobody's going through the same thing, or that you really have to take this whole thing on your own. And either it comes out in a physical sense, or maybe yelling, or just like breaking stuff. And it's a it's a form of stored energy that has to come out somehow. And so I knew I needed to find a healthier way to let that out, or else it was going to come out in these unhealthy ways.
Would you say, in a way, you had a short fuse?
Oh, 100%. A very short fuse, but I was very performance driven, wanted this external of me to seem all okay and happy go lucky and smiley. But on the inside, I really had to, like, remove myself from a situation to let it out or whatever. But yeah, definitely a very short fuse. And I've been working really, really hard on that the past couple of years to kind of get rid of that.
So I'm guessing that fitness played some sort of role in helping you have an outlet for that stored energy that you were experiencing.
Yeah, 100%. And really in college is when I felt like I utilized it to the best degree. When I was at college and maybe something happened at home, or was dealing with some family stuff from far away, getting to the gym, whether it was a late night session, early morning, I would come out of the gym and just notice that everything was calmed down. I was cooled off. And I didn't really dig into the science behind it. I wasn't really interested in that. I just wanted to get as big as I possibly could in college. Um, but I started to notice that I'd say junior or senior year of college, and it was like, oh, this really does help in a different way, and there is some science behind it. And that's when I really started digging into it and understanding that this plays a huge role in my life, and I know it will and does in a lot of other people's lives as well.
So you started to have that awareness and you were starting to link some of the mental and emotional benefits of fitness, and that was making sense. And you continued and you pursued therapy. Why did you choose to pursue therapy in addition to fitness? And was there a specific moment where your mom or somebody else finally got through to you and you realized, hey, I should try this?
I think it was just a point where I was unable to forgive, and I was just harboring these things that were always on my mind, no matter what. And I wasn't really sure what was going on because I was doing the fitness stuff. I opened up to a couple of people, but there needed to be a third party that could really step in and help me analyze these things on a professional level. And to all the guys out there, and I'm just speaking to men, kind of mental health note here, it is not a weak point, but I thought it was a weak point for about 10 years of my life. And I wish I would have gone a lot sooner and listened to my mom on that and went to it. But again, I can be a stubborn guy that does not like to take orders. So took a sec to crack me, but I will say, if you are dealing with this stuff, if you do have some internalized anger, ask for some recommendations for therapy. And I promise you, you probably have some friends in your circle who are going through the same thing or have gone through it, and you're not alone.
Mm. If seeking help isn't a weakness, would you go as far as saying that it's a strength?
Yeah, 100%. The more I've opened up to people, and maybe I don't go into crazy detail with everybody, but the more I've been open about this, I've actually been able to encourage some of my friends to go to therapy. And being open about it and asking for help is definitely something that has helped me. And I just have this sense of peace now. I'm not perfect, but letting it out and talking through it does start to level the playing field in your own head for sure.
Yeah. So I'll share two things. One is a story I've shared before on the podcast, but it's been a while. We're over the 100 episode mark. So, episode 35 of this podcast, I had on my friend Danny Gavertz, and Danny and I went to college together. Danny and I played football together our freshman year. And Danny was this kid who was just always smiling, super happy, liked by everybody, and I liked him as well. But I never spent time with Danny or for that fact anybody else because I stopped drinking freshman year of college, which is a bit backwards because I was 18 and I was stopping drinking, which is a whole nother
Yeah.
story. But I would spend late nights in the gym by myself, early mornings in the library by myself, time in my dorm room while everybody else was out partying and drinking. And I was by myself, sad, feeling alone. And I had just assumed that Danny was out partying with everybody else. And so, long story short, I go throughout the rest of college, graduate, go to graduate school, marry my wife. We go to Maui on our honeymoon a couple years back. Danny is living in Maui with his now wife. And we met him on the beach. And it was so good to reconnect with him. And I remember talking about college, talking about football. And he just turned to me and he was like, yeah, man, I hated it. He's like, I didn't drink. And he's like, I spent
Oh,
almost every Friday, Saturday night in my room, just like alone. Like I'd cry. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, man, like I could have gotten so close with this guy. We both could have felt not alone. We could have formed this bond and connection if one of us was just strong enough to open up and be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. And I think that's how life is a lot of times. Like we are working next to people, we are living next to people, we are talking with people on a daily basis who are hurting so bad, maybe struggling with the same things we're struggling with. And we're all trying to put on this brave face. And because of that, we don't let anybody else in. We don't know anybody else is struggling, and we all feel so alone. So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
No, that's an incredible story and such a testament to anybody else out there kind of feeling the same way. It's just reach out and talk to your friends and go deeper than some of the surface level stuff that we think we just need to stay at too. So thanks for sharing that.
Of course. And then the second point I had was on the topic of forgiveness. It's something that we've touched on in previous podcast episodes, and I would love to go a little bit deeper into it because I do think it's something that everyone can benefit from thinking about on a deeper level. There's a great quote from Lewis Smedes who said, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you." And I think a lot of times when we harbor anger, when we aren't able to forgive, we are actually just doing damage to ourselves. And yet it's so hard. And so I'm curious, what was the process of loosening your grip on that and actually pursuing forgiveness actively with intention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step was going to therapy and dealing with some of those anger, anxiety issues myself. And they flare out from time to time. It is a part of you, and that's the thing I like to communicate. They don't ever really disappear, but you get a control on them. So I would say that's kind of step one. And then step two is getting very comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. And I got really good at that with some friends and then ultimately my mom and dad. And I just want to say love them both dearly now and had some really great talks with them. And we are just such good friends at this point in my life. And I'm very thankful for that. But there was a point where, I cut them out at certain periods, and maybe that wasn't the smartest thing, but it ultimately led to these long, in-depth discussions that allowed us to finally just release. And the weight that comes off your shoulders when you're truly able to forgive somebody, not just saying it, but in your head being able to clear it, it is one of the greatest feelings in the world, and you kind of just feel light as a feather. So that would kind of be my two-step process. A lot of little steps in between there, but it's not easy, but it's so worth it to let that stuff go.
Was there any part of yourself that you have needed to forgive through that process?
I think I just needed to forgive myself for some of the mistakes that I made through harboring that anger because it would come out in unhealthy ways, and don't need to go into all the specifics, but definitely some things I wasn't proud of. Sorry to all the walls I broke, my landlord, but yeah, outside of that stuff, it's learning that your parents, your friends, we're all people trying to do our best in the circumstances that we're given. And once you are very content in your situation, I think that's where you're able to find peace and really navigate through these hard things in a different way.
Mm. Yeah, I found myself in recent years and months just as I've been dealing with people, and this can blend a little bit into the business side of things, feeling frustrated at poor communication or feeling upset when there's lack of follow through or anytime somebody else is not acting in the way that I would act or that I would hope they would act, I can find myself feeling tension there. And I have to remind myself on a somewhat frequent basis that I cannot control how other people behave. I cannot control other people at all. And the only thing I'm in control of are the choices I make, the perspective that I adopt, and the actions that I take. And that is such a hard thing to truly embrace in the moment when you're feeling emotions. But I would imagine that part of forgiveness, and you can correct me if this is not the case for you, is just like leaning into the fact that you can't change or control other people and you just have to focus on you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the key word there is just kind of being able to surrender that stuff and know that it's not on you for how people act. And like you said, you can't control that. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I was given is if someone's acting out at you or you're feeling the brunt of that and you start to feel yourself get worked up, you just have to realize that people have their own stuff they're going through too. And I would say 99% of the time it's nothing you've done, but it's an outburst, kind of similar to the way I would outburst. It's an outburst of things that they're dealing with. And so when you learn to not take things too personally, you can kind of nod your head when someone's mouthing off or whatever and just let them be and understand that there's probably something else going on. And when I've adopted that perspective, I would say I'm angry like 95% less than I used to be because you truly can't control other people. And I would argue that it's a way better way to live for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think just to expand a bit, I do think that everybody is dealing with a lot of stuff that none of us can see. And it's been said before that if you were in a room with a bunch of other people and everybody threw their problems in a pile in the middle of the room, it's pretty likely that you would just grab your problems and run away because it's so scary to look at what other people are dealing with. And we don't see that. But we have to know that it could be there. And how other people act is more likely a reflection of what's going on inside of them than it is about us.
100%. And just to touch on the people not following through thing, I think that's like my number one tick. And it took me a while to definitely let that one go. But the follow through thing is definitely important to me. And I'm sure it stems from somewhere, probably something I still need to unpack. So still working through stuff for sure. But yeah.
Yeah. So, with that being said, let's shift our focus to the things that you can control. And
Yeah.
I am curious to hear when you look at your life to this point, what is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose? And why did you choose to do that thing?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it already, but definitely starting my own personal training business. I have learned more about myself in these last 2 years than I ever have in my entire life. You can look at stuff, you can ask questions, you can theorize about how to do it, but once you start taking action, you just start hitting those failure points over and over and over again, and that's really where the growth happens. And we don't broadcast our failures, but man, the past 2 years, when I look back, I could probably give you the months they happened and the time and just how angry I got or whatever. But it was a really hard decision, leaving the corporate world, some of that stability. But when I really leaned into it and told myself, this is what I'm going to do, I want to impact people and give them the same clarity that I got from the training, the nutrition, kind of just the mindset work that comes along with it. It just did something different inside me. And so I decided to keep pushing and it's been a fun journey, but it was definitely a hard one. And I would say it never gets easier. You just learn how to deal with things with better grace.
And I could talk about this topic for hours. And so I'll be pointed with my points and succinct with the questions. But one question I have right off the bat is that transition from the corporate world to running your own business. Was that a I'm in the corporate world one day and I'm running my own business the next day? Or was it a I'm in the corporate world and I am grinding, working hard outside of my work hours to set myself up for this transition that I know is coming?
Yeah, I'd say I did it on the side for about a year, and it was a quote unquote side hustle, I guess, but felt more than that. And my roommates in Seattle and my roommate here in San Diego could definitely attest that there's just things that you have to give up to kind of get this off the ground. And I would have loved to go to every Padres game that I could have when I first moved here, but I actually went to my first one probably like a month ago now, and all my friends laugh at me, but there's just a lot of nights where I was taking meetings after 5 p.m., work until 9, 9:30, 10, 11, sometimes midnight, one, whatever it was. But you kind of just get into this zone where you recognize that everything you're doing is all on you and everything stops at you. You aren't depending on other people until I hire somebody, which is coming up soon and it's really exciting. But when you are able to understand that the buck does stop at you and you're responsible, it changes something inside of you. And not saying that the corporate world doesn't do that. There's a ton of responsibility there, but it's different when you're definitely going full commission month to month. It gives you a different perspective for sure. So I did that for about a year before I decided to go full time.
Yeah. I asked that question because I was, my personal journey was coaching on the side, ramping that up. And again, in the year and a half before my transition, I was putting a lot of work into it and making those sacrifices. And I think a lot of people will look at the things that you have done, the things that I have done, and just assume that, oh, they left their job and they started this business. No, we started this a long time before we actually left our jobs, and we thought it through, and there was a lot of planning, and yes, it's a risk, but it was a calculated risk. And to your
Yeah.
point of when you actually do leave that job, leave that stability, you have no floor beneath you, but you also have no ceiling above you. There's this really unique push and pull. It's almost like your back is against a wall, and so you're being pushed from behind, and there's nowhere to go. So you feel like you have to move forward, and there's that ownership aspect that kicks in. And then for me, there's also this really exciting, hey, the possibilities are endless, and the harder I work, the more I get rewarded for it. And that's really attractive as well. And I'm assuming you felt the same.
Yeah, 100%. I love that there's no ceiling, and being able to scale for the past 2 years has really showed me that. And learning how to scale to different levels is really exciting. And, there's your mountains and your valleys and all that. So I'm not saying it's all just scaling linearly in the right direction the whole time, but I also am just somebody who loves to work under pressure, and I love to have my back up against a wall. And I might be weird for that, but I do love that, and I love fighting out of stuff, and I love fighting for something that I really believe in and want to do.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, I think you touched on this, but I would love to go deeper is the personal growth side of business and entrepreneurship. And I also feel like I've grown more as a person in these past 2 years than I ever have before in my life in many ways. What are some of the biggest lessons or the biggest ways that you've grown over these past 2 years?
Yeah, I think the first one is, you're always told that you should turn your failures into lessons, but it's not always easy to do when the failures are big or something that you really don't want to happen. But I think that has been one of the biggest things I've grown in. Every time there's a failure or a setback or something doesn't work out exactly how I thought it was going to, I really take a step back and analyze what happened, whether it was a meeting, a client plan, a nutrition plan that needed some adjustment, or, whatever it was. There's always going to be something, but I learned that there has to be these adjustments. And after every failure, I've either implemented something new in my systems to make something more efficient. I've created a new process to make clients happier, onboarding clients, whatever it is. I really have just learned to take failures as learning points. And that's something that I think I will always take on now. A second one is that you have to be able to adapt to a lot of different situations, personalities, and people. I think as an entrepreneur, especially in my line of work, just doing the personal training, you come across a lot of different personalities, a lot of people's backgrounds, and sometimes it can feel like you are a counselor to some degree on check-in calls and things like that. So for me, I remember early on, I would internalize that, and I would just really take on other people's stress. And I didn't do a great job of separating those two things. So I think I've just learned how to compartmentalize in a healthy way. Those meetings, my own personal life, and things like that. So I would say those are kind of two of the biggest lessons I've learned. And then a final third one too is that there really is no limit. And if you want to keep going, there will be points where you fail. There will be points that are hard, but you have to get up every single morning and tell yourself that you're going to do it every single day. And that came from the gym, training consistently, eating consistently. I had built this proof in my life that if you are consistent in something, it will work. And the only time that it will fail is if you decide to stop.
Yeah, hard work works. Confidence is built through saying you're going to do something and then showing up and doing that thing. And even if you fall short, it's the effort that counts, it's the intention that matters. And you have to be fully committed to a process without being attached to a specific outcome, which can be really, really hard, especially on the days where the outcomes are not coming.
Yeah.
And I think to add to your lessons, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. One of my biggest lessons was how to manage my emotions and how to navigate the volatility of entrepreneurship and the ownership of having your own business, because there were days where, everything's going right, things are clicking. You have a 3 hour window in the afternoon after being super productive in the morning, and you could go work out, you can go for a run while all of your friends are stuck at work, right? And you do whatever you want, and it feels amazing. And then the next morning you wake up and someone lost their job, so they have to stop working with you. And somebody else is not responding to your messages. And, this thing broke or this thing's not working. And there's this great quote from Laura Mappis who said, some days you'll feel like the ocean, and some days you'll feel like you're drowning in it. And I
Yeah.
think that's like pretty much entrepreneurship in a nutshell. But to your point, whether you are the ocean or you're drowning in it, you have to get up the next morning and say, I can do this. I'm going to do this. And you show up and you give your best effort. And that's such a refinement of who you are as a person. I would not trade this for the world.
No, managing emotions and, kind of going back to what I was talking about during the divorce and all that, I would say I would have really high highs, but really extreme lows too. That would just be like almost destructive. Even the highs would just make me make decisions that maybe I wouldn't have if I was a little more even keeled. And so managing emotions throughout this business has really taught me to just stay even. It doesn't mean don't get happy or get frustrated, but you kind of learn not to have those extremes, which allows you to deal with situations with a little bit more poise.
Yeah, I think poise is a great word for it. Being able to stand tall even when the resistance is great, being able to stand firm even when the resistance is great. And, I'm not sure if this is something you've experienced. It's something that I've experienced to varying degrees, but just being able to know who you are and who you are not, who you are there to serve and who you are not there to serve, what to say yes to and what to say no to. And I feel like in my life, a lot of things I used to think were opportunities, I'm actually now realizing are distractions. Not distractions in the sense that they are inherently bad, but distractions in the sense of they take time away from things I could be doing that would actually move me a lot further down the path that I want to be. And it's that decision making with that intentional decision making that is so crucial when it comes to doing your own thing. And I mean, have you experienced that?
Yeah, I think just time management and decision making too has been a huge thing as well. And Um, I think the biggest misconception is once you step into it full time, you just have all this time and you have a bunch of free time. But I actually found that I was working more than I was, even between splitting time between the two jobs, if you will. And it all comes down to how much you want it. And there are definitely days where I'm fortunate to be able to say, sometimes I would take a whole day off, like a Tuesday, when I just needed a mental health break, and I probably couldn't have done that in the corporate world. So very thankful for that. But there's some days that I'll be working super late on Wednesday, Thursday nights, and just have to say no to things. So back to your point, kind of getting back on topic, the time management side of things is something that you learn through this as well. And also, sometimes you don't have to work as hard. It's more about working more efficiently too. So I've learned that in creating systems and a way to um, just look at your schedule, see where those time sucks are, and being able to eliminate those is something really important that you need to do as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Now, before we move on to the next question, I want to give you the space if there's anything else about this journey you've been on in entrepreneurship or any more lessons or points you'd like to share. Now's the time. And if not, we can just keep moving.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I want to say is I know that jump can be scary. And I know I've had conversations with a lot of people who have thought about it, who have been thinking about it, maybe thought about it 3 years ago, but still haven't acted on it. The only way that you're going to know if you can do it or not is by just taking the damn jump and just doing it. And like I said, I've learned all these lessons just by doing it, taking action. And so, if you're someone out there who is thinking about going into entrepreneurship, you have an idea, you have a passion, but you've had some voices around you, like me, who said it was unsafe, not going to work. Like I've been through it, I've heard all this stuff. If you put your heart into it and you take action, you can do it and you will. So that's kind of the last thing I want to say there. Just don't be afraid to take that jump.
I couldn't love that anymore. And funny enough, I've got a great quote that goes hand in hand before we keep
Let's
moving
hear
here. So
it.
this is from M. Scott Peck, who said, the truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. And I think if somebody felt that quote in their heart, or you were nodding your head along the whole time and you said, "Yeah, I am uncomfortable. I am unhappy, or I am unfulfilled, and right now I just feel this discomfort and I need to step out of this rut," then pair that quote with what Jacob just said and start taking small steps, right? It doesn't have to be big. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow, but start doing something and have conversations with people who have been down the path that you're thinking of going down. Try to put a service out there, try to brainstorm a product, right? Take action and let that action give you feedback, and put one foot in front of the other, letting each step reveal the next. And before you know it, you might realize it's not as scary as you thought it was.
And kind of just to come back, one more point there too. I was talking about therapy and reaching out and all these things. In business, you do not have to do it all by yourself. And I am so glad that I reached out and hired a business coach, sought mentors. So if you're scared to kind of start on your own, reach out to somebody who is at the point that you want to be at and ask them for help. People will be more willing than you know to help you out too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So, with that being said, we're going to move on and I'm going to ask you a simple question. This is the Project Endure podcast. And so, when you hear the word endurance, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I wrote this one down because I wanted to have a good answer for this one. But I think endurance is the ability to face any of life's challenges, making the decision to learn lessons from those challenges and never stop moving forward.
Mm. So that ability to learn lessons from those challenges sounds like a very key piece to your definition. And it's not something that many other people have said on the podcast before, but I really, really like it because I feel like if you're not willing to learn lessons, then when you face inevitably that obstacle or similar challenge, you will most likely not be able to overcome it because you didn't learn from it the first time. Is that kind of how you see it as it relates to endurance?
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of give a little fitness example here. I think about just like either if you're on a run or you're doing a lift or something physically exerting, and there is this point that you get to in your head where everything starts to become extremely hard, and you have this split-second decision. Are you going to get to that tipping point and go backwards? Or are you going to sit in that uncomfortable spot enough to get through to the other side? And that's where the growth happens. And I really think that mental picture is kind of the definition of endurance to me because it's going to happen and it's your choice whether to fall back or move forward.
Mm, I like that a lot. And I think patience combined with purpose allows us to be persistence. Well, allows us to be persistent. And
Yeah.
I think that persistence is similar to endurance in many ways. However, if we don't learn from our mistakes, like you alluded to, we'll continue to run up against similar barriers and we might actually move ourselves backwards instead of forward. And
Yeah.
I just think that's such a good point that I haven't really thought about before, if I'm being honest. But
Yeah. No, it's something I've experienced a lot, especially was not a big runner, but definitely took that on earlier this year. And there have definitely been some runs where I wanted to stop and it was uncomfortable and it's not something I've been great at. But ever since I started just pushing through those things, I've just really actually enjoyed the sport of running now too. And it's become a regular part of my life. So just another quick little anecdote.
we'll go on a little tangent here and then come right back. But as it relates to running or just fitness as a whole, do you have any goals on the horizon or pursuits that you're currently in the middle of?
Yeah, right now I actually signed up for my third High Rocks event in LA this December. I did one last December that, if I'm being honest, kicked my ass because I was not in running shape. And then I did a doubles event in New York this year with one of my first clients that signed on with me 2 years ago, which was a pretty special moment. But this December, we're definitely, me and my new partner, Chance, are looking to take that podium spot this year. So setting that goal, training hard for it. And then next year, I want to take on my first Ironman. And that's kind of my big personal feat and something that I never thought I would do or train for, but the training's starting now. And so I'm really excited to take that on next year for sure.
Out of the three disciplines in triathlon, what is your weak point?
I would definitely say swimming. I grew up swimming, but I have not been in a pool consistently at all over the past couple of years. So getting back in that shape will definitely be a challenge. I really enjoy biking, definitely getting into running and loving that, but the swimming will probably be the next major thing that I have to start tackling here.
So a few episodes back, episode 108, I had on Jack Driscoll, who did 4 different fitness competitions on 4 consecutive weekends on a road trip across the country. And the fourth event was a full Ironman. And on the podcast, he shared that he actually didn't do an open water swim at all until the day before his Ironman, and he still crushed it, which I think is just a testament to the human body, how resilient and capable we are when our mind is in the right place. And so, no doubt you'll crush those goals, and I'm excited to follow along with all of it. And so, as we wind down this conversation, there are people listening to this who are all over the country, all over the world, in all different seasons of life, going through all different kinds of things. And yet, underneath the surface, as human beings, we all share more in common than we realize, and we are all struggling with something. And so, in a minute, you'll have an opportunity to speak to anybody and everybody who is struggling right now with whatever it might be. And you're going to be right in their ear. What would you say to that person who's in a dark season, a rough patch, just not sure what to do or where to go?
Yeah, I would say to remember that, it is just a season and that it will eventually pass. Or it will eventually pass. And if you look at your life and look at the hard times that you've been through, or any failures or challenging events, you've come out on the other side of it. May not be perfect, may not always look the way you're thinking, but it will eventually pass. And every time I've been through a hard time or a dark season, and I've touched on this many times, I've always learned a new valuable lesson that makes the hard times that come up in the future a little bit more tolerable. And you just kind of gain this new resilience to those hard things. So take the tough season, if you're in one right now, as a lesson, a learning period. Ask for help and don't be afraid to fail because it's inevitable and you will get through it.
Yeah. And I think to round that out, one thing you and I can both agree on based on the risks that we've taken to get to where we are, sometimes the biggest risk is taking no risk at all. And the worst that happens is you learn a little bit along the way in many cases.
100%. Yeah. And I would say, just kind of going back to what you shared about Jack, I watched his journey and was incredibly inspired by that. One of the main reasons that I wanted to go tackle this Ironman. And so, shout out to you, Jack. But yeah, it's just, if you don't go try it, you're never going to know how far you can push yourself.
Yep. Well said. So, Jacob, if people want to learn more about what you're up to, if they want to connect with you, if they just want to follow along with everything you're doing, where's the best place for people to do that?
Yeah, I would say the first best spot would just be my personal Instagram. That's at Jacob Bills. Very simple. Then I also have a business Instagram for my personal training company. It's at Built by Bills. So reaching out on those 2 platforms, and I'll always respond within the day.
Awesome. And he will respond. He is very punctual. He follows through. I could attest to that. And I appreciate that about you. And I appreciate you big time for coming on here and just having an awesome conversation and for everything you're doing. So thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, Joe. I think this is just an incredible platform, and listening to some of the other episodes, I think you're touching, well, I know you're touching a lot of people because I've heard about this through a lot of people at BPN. And actually, the first time through somebody I went to college with was actually our first connection outside of the BPN community. So thank you for what you're doing. I believe in this, and I'm excited to see how it impacts a lot more people to come.
Thank you so much, man. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, Check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.